The history of the Knights Templar is a journey from 9 poor knights to the wealthiest corporation that held all of Europe in fear and in debt. In this video, we will restore the true chronology of events, separating real facts from mystical speculation. We will tell how humble protectors of pilgrims transformed into the elite army of Christ, and how, after taking a vow of poverty, they managed to invent the first international banking system in history. We will take a detailed look at the great conspiracy of Philip the Fair and the events of the fateful Friday the 13th, when the powerful order was declared outside the law overnight. You will learn where their immense treasures disappeared, how the dying curse of the last Grand Master came true, and where the heirs of the Templars may be hiding today. Suggest new topics in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Here we talk about history, from ancient legends to modern tales, from historical facts to mysterious plots. Make yourself comfortable. We begin. The history of the most powerful military religious order began in the chaos of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The year was 1119. Less than 20 years had passed since the participants of the First Crusade had captured the Holy City. Although Jerusalem was in Christian hands, beyond its walls the law of force prevailed. Pilgrims flowing in from across Europe to venerate the Holy Sepulchre became easy prey for bands of robbers and Saracen raiding parties. The road from the port of Jaffa to Jerusalem was littered with the bodies of those who never reached their destination. In these conditions, a French nobleman from Champagne, Hugh de Payens, made a decision that would change the course of history. He and 8 of his companions appeared before King Baldwin II. These men possessed neither wealth nor numerous servants. They called themselves the Poor Knights of Christ. Their idea was simple, yet revolutionary for its time: to unite monastic devotion with the art of war. In the presence of the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the knights took the 3 traditional vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience, but they added a 4th, the most important for their mission, the vow to protect pilgrims on the dangerous roads of Palestine. King Baldwin welcomed the initiative. The young kingdom lacked soldiers to guard every route, and volunteers ready to fight for the faith without pay were invaluable. As their residents, the monarch granted them part of his palace on the Temple Mount. In ancient times, the legendary Temple of Solomon had stood on this very site, and later the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built there. Because of this location, the knights became known as the Templars, from the Latin word templum, meaning temple. The first 9 years of the order's existence are shrouded in silence. Historians still debate how 9 men could have guarded the long roads of an entire region. Legends claim that during this time the knights were not only fighting, but also excavating beneath the Temple Mount in search of ancient relics or secret knowledge. Yet documentary sources describe an extremely harsh life. The so-called Temple of Solomon was no magnificent palace. It consisted of half-ruined chambers where the knights lived in cramped and humble conditions. They had so few horses that the order's official seal depicted 2 riders on a single horse, a symbol of their poverty and brotherhood. For a long time, the order remained a small local group, little known in Europe. Everything changed when Hugh de Payens realized that the organization needed official church support and a powerful influx of recruits. In 1127, he traveled west. His main goal was to meet the most influential spiritual leader of the time, Bernard of Clairvaux, abbot of the Cistercian order. Bernard was a man of colossal energy and authority.
He became the spiritual architect of the Templars. Christian doctrine contained a contradiction. The commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," did not easily align with the life of a warrior. Bernard resolved this tension by creating the ideological foundation of the order. In his treatise, In Praise of the New Knighthood, he declared that killing the enemy of Christianity was not homicide, but the destruction of evil. According to Bernard, a knight of the Templar who struck down an infidel committed no sin, but fulfilled divine justice. This concept transformed the Templars into a sacred army, monks with swords in their hands. Donations began to pour in. Nobles from across Europe granted the order lands, castles, and money, believing it the best way to redeem their sins. The culmination came at the Council of Troyes in January 1129. There, the highest church officials officially recognized the order. The Latin rule of the Templars was presented, a strict code of 72 articles regulating every aspect of their lives. The rule prescribed specific colors for their clothing. The knights were to wear white mantles, symbolizing purity of intention and life. The Red Cross, later their most recognizable emblem, would be added soon after. The rule detailed their daily routine, how they should eat, pray, and care for their equipment. They were forbidden to possess personal property. Even letters from relatives could be read only in the presence of the Grand Master. Discipline was iron. The Council of Troyes transformed a small brotherhood of 9 men into an official institution of the Catholic Church. Hugh de Payens became the first Grand Master of the order. He returned to the East not as the leader of a handful of volunteers, but as the head of an organization backed by the Pope and the most powerful monarchs of Europe. Caravans of resources and new brothers began to arrive in the Holy Land. Within a single decade, the Templars rose from obscurity to become the elite arm of the Church. Religious fervor, the financial support of European aristocracy, and the ideological foundation laid by Bernard of Clairvaux created a structure unlike any in the Middle Ages. They were no longer mere guardians of the roads. They became the symbol of a new kind of faith, a faith ready to defend its ideals not only with prayer, but with steel. A new era was beginning, one in which the Templars would become the principal players and a decisive force on the chessboard of the Middle East.
After official recognition, the Order of the Templars rapidly transformed from a group of enthusiasts into the most powerful organization of the medieval world. This required not only faith, but a solid legal foundation, one that would free the Templars from the authority of local bishops and secular lords. That foundation was laid in 1139, when Pope Innocent II issued one of the most significant papal bulls in church history, Omne Datum Optimum. This document granted the Templars privileges no other order or monastery of the time could even dream of. From that moment on, the Templars answered only to the Pope. No king, no duke, and most importantly, no local bishop had the authority to interfere in their internal affairs or judge them. They were granted the right to build their own churches and appoint their own priests, making them completely independent from the ecclesiastical structures of the lands in which they operated. Another crucial privilege was exemption from paying tithes. While all other Christians were required to give 1/10 of their income to the church, the Templars kept all their revenues and were even granted the right to collect donations and taxes on their own lands. Overnight, the order became the most financially efficient institution in Europe. Every resource placed at their disposal went directly to the war effort in the Holy Land, bypassing the endless bureaucratic chains of the time. At the same time, a rigid internal structure was taking shape.
The order became a clear hierarchy, a pyramid in which every member knew his place and duty. At the Virshina stood the Grand Master, elected by a narrow circle of senior officials. His authority was immense, but not absolute. In crucial matters, such as declaring war or selling land, he was required to consult the General Chapter, the Council of the Order's elders. The most privileged class consisted of the Knight brothers. Only men of noble birth, already knighted before joining the order, could enter this elite circle. They wore the famous white mantles, symbolizing purity. These knights formed the core of the heavy cavalry, the main Udarnaya Sila on the battlefield. The second and most numerous category were the sergeants. They wore brown or black mantles, distinguishing them from the knights. Coming from townsmen or free peasant families, sergeants served in light cavalry, guarded supply caravans, practiced crafts, and managed the estates of the order's commanderies. The entire logistics system and daily functioning of the order rested on their shoulders. Though lower in hierarchy, they were no less courageous in battle and absolutely vital to the machine. The third group consisted of chaplains, ordained priests responsible solely for the spiritual needs of the brothers. They conducted services, heard confessions, and ensured that the rule was upheld from a spiritual perspective. Because confession remained within the order, its secrets remained sealed inside. To sustain continuous warfare in the East, the Templars created a unique network of commanderies across Europe. A commandery functioned as a hybrid of monastery, barracks, and agricultural enterprise. Such strongholds appeared in France, England, Castile, Aragon, and across the lands of the Holy Roman Empire. Each commandery worked towards a common goal: cultivating grain, breeding war horses, collecting donations from local nobility, and training new recruits. Surplus food and funds were transported to Mediterranean ports and from there to the Kingdom of Jerusalem. It was the first large-scale coordinated logistics network in European history, capable of transferring enormous resources across thousands of kilometers. Life within a commandery followed a strict routine. The brothers rose long before dawn for prayer. Their days were filled with weapons training, physical labor, and worship. The rule forbade gambling, hunting for sport, and even excessive laughter. Clothing had to remain simple and beards neatly trimmed, in sharp contrast to the extravagance of many secular knights. Discipline was absolute. Punishments for violating the rule were severe, from losing the white mantle and demotion to imprisonment in chains. This severity forged warriors who would later become the terror of Saracen armies. The Knights of the Temple were not merely soldiers, they were parts of a single organism where personal will was subordinated entirely to the interests of the Brotherhood. By the mid-12th century, the order became a state within a state. In Europe, they were respected and feared. Kings sought their support, understanding that the Templars possessed not only swords, but immense administrative power. Their black and white banner, known as the Beauséant, inspired hope in allies and dread in enemies. This structure was so effective that even centuries later it would be studied as a model of ideal organization. Yet it was precisely this power and independence that one day would provoke envy among European monarchs. But for now, at the height of their strength, the Templars stood ready to unleash their discipline and resources on battlefields that would forever inscribe their names into the military chronicles of humanity. By the mid-12th century, the Order of the Temple had firmly established itself as the dominant military force in the Crusader states. If in its early decades the Templars primarily guarded the roads, they had now become a full-fledged army, capable not only of defense, but of dictating terms on the battlefield. Their strength rested on two pillars: exceptional mastery in fortress construction and unprecedented discipline, which transformed each unit into a single, devastating mechanism. Templar military strategy in the Holy Land revolved around a network of powerful defensive strongholds. Their castles were not mere barracks, they were among the most advanced engineering achievements of their time. Built on strategic heights and along the coastline, these fortresses formed an almost impenetrable barrier against Saracen armies. One of the most magnificent examples was the castle of Safed, dominating the region of Galilee from a high mountain. Contemporary chroniclers wrote that its walls seemed the work of giants rather than men. Within its walls, hundreds of knights and thousands of servants could live for years, sustained by vast food reserves and deep water cisterns. Another vital stronghold was Tortosa on the Syrian coast, serving not only as a fortress but as the maritime gateway of the order. Their architectural design was meticulous: double walls, curved entrances that prevented direct battering ram assaults, and towers positioned for deadly crossfire. The Templars were among the first to widely implement concentric castle designs, where inner walls rose higher than the outer defenses. Even if an enemy breached the first line, he would find himself trapped beneath devastating fire from above. Yet the true strength of the order lay not in stone, but in men. In an era when most armies consisted of disorganized militias or knights seeking personal glory, the Templars introduced total discipline. The rule demanded complete self-denial. In battle, a knight was forbidden to act on personal impulse. He had to follow the banner of the order and obey the commands of his marshal. Breaking formation or launching a premature attack in pursuit of trophies was punishable by expulsion. One of the strictest and most famous articles of the rule forbade retreat. A knight could not leave the battlefield while the black and white banner, the Beausion, still flew. Even if the enemy held a tenfold numerical advantage, a Templar was expected to fight to the last drop of blood. If the banner fell, he was to rally beneath the flag of another Christian order, such as the Hospitallers. Only when no banner remained raised was retreat permitted. This fanatical devotion forged an aura of invincibility around the order and inspired genuine terror among their enemies. Saladin himself acknowledged that the Templars and Hospitallers were his most dangerous opponents, often ordering that captured knights be executed on the spot, knowing they could neither be broken nor bribed. On the battlefield, the Templars perfected the art of the heavy cavalry shock charge. Armored knights on powerful war horses formed a tight line, knee to knee. At the marshal's signal, the living battering ram advanced, accelerating from walk to trot and finally to full gallop. The impact was devastating, capable of shattering any defensive line. If the first blow failed, they regrouped and struck again, moving as a single monolith. The order reached the height of its glory in 1177 at the Battle of Montgisard. 16-year-old King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, afflicted with leprosy, led a small force, its core composed of 500 Templars. Opposing them stood Saladin's army of 30,000, already confident of victory. The Templars struck directly at the center of the enemy formation while the Saracen army was still on the march. The fury of 500 white mantles crushed Saladin's personal guard within minutes. The Sultan himself barely escaped, fleeing on a swift camel. The battlefield remained in Crusader hands. Saladin lost nearly 90% of his forces. The victory delayed the fall of Jerusalem by a decade and proved that the Templar war machine was the most formidable in the known world. Yet their strength was not only in ferocity. They were masters of reconnaissance and logistics. Sergeants ensured constant supply lines, repaired armor in the field, and maintained the order's carefully bred war horses, animals trained to bite and trample in battle. By the 1180s, the Templars controlled dozens of fortresses and commanded an army whose training surpassed that of any royal force. Their golden age in the Holy Land was a time when faith and warfare fused into one. They became the Iron Shield of Jerusalem, the symbol of Christian resistance in the East. Despite constant losses, their ranks were replenished by volunteers from Europe, eager to join the most renowned brotherhood of warrior monks. It was during this era that the legend of the Templars began to shape, guardians of higher truth, invincible defenders of the faith, whose castles and swords stood watch over the very borders of civilization.
Paradoxically, an organization founded upon the strictest vow of personal poverty transformed within a few decades into the most powerful financial corporation of the medieval world. The wealth of the Templars was not a fortuitous accumulation of spoils. It was the result of creating the first transnational economic system in history. While knights shed blood on the battlefields of Palestine, their brothers in Europe constructed a complex network of asset management, one that was centuries ahead of its time. The foundation of this prosperity was donation. The belief that supporting the order ensured salvation of the soul was widespread. Kings, dukes, and lesser nobles granted the Templars lands, villages, mills, vineyards, and even rights to collect market tolls. By the mid-12th century, the order possessed thousands of estates across Europe. Yet, unlike many landowners, the Templars managed these resources with military efficiency. They introduced advanced agricultural methods, drained swamps, built roads, and turned every donation into a steady source of income. Their greatest contribution to world history, however, was a revolution in money circulation. In that era, traveling from Paris to Jerusalem with sacks of gold almost guaranteed becoming a victim of bandits. The order offered a brilliant solution, what we would today call a banking check. A pilgrim or merchant could deposit gold in a Templar commandery in London or Marseille, receive a coded document in exchange, and upon arrival in Jerusalem, present that parchment to local treasurers and withdraw the equivalent amount in local currency, minus a small commission. This system functioned flawlessly due to trust and the order's unique network of branches. The imprint of the Templars' seal and secret identification codes made forgery near impossible. For the first time in history, capital became liquid and mobile. Money could cross borders and seas faster than the people who owned it, existing merely as entries in the order's ledgers. This allowed the Templars to accumulate immense reserves of cash, which they began to circulate. Despite the Church's prohibition of usury, the order found ways around the restriction, presenting interest as administrative fees, risk compensation, or through complex leasing arrangements. Soon, the greatest monarchs of Europe became their clients. The kings of France effectively turned the Paris Temple into their royal treasury. The Templars collected royal taxes, managed state expenditures, and issued loans to finance wars and crusades. Their financial reporting was exemplary. Every commandery submitted annual detailed records of income and expenditures to the central treasury, first in Jerusalem, later in Cyprus. Leadership could see the order's overall condition almost in real time. Their vaults held not only money, but precious metals, gemstones, and sacred relics stored in fortresses considered the safest places in the world. Alongside banking, the order developed its own transportation infrastructure. To move resources and reinforcements to the Holy Land, the Templars created a military transport fleet. Their ships crossed the Mediterranean, linking Europe to the ports of the Levant.
Eventually, the fleet became so vast that the order entered commercial shipping, transporting pilgrims, merchants' goods, and livestock. They effectively controlled major trade routes. Ports such as La Rochelle in France became key gateways through which Eastern goods entered European markets. The production of weapons and equipment held a special place in the Templar economy. Within their commanderies, they maintained the finest forges and workshops. They depended on no external suppliers, saving enormous sums that other armies spent on intermediaries. Templar wealth reshaped European society. They were the first to think in terms of a global market. The Templars invested in bridges, ports, and urban districts, stimulating trade and craftsmanship. In many cities, Templar territories enjoyed extraterritorial rights free from local laws, making them ideal zones for free commerce. By the late 12th century, the Order of the Temple had become a borderless economic state. Its annual income exceeded that of Europe's greatest kingdoms. Yet this financial power became its greatest vulnerability. As kings realized their own finances depended on decisions made by the Grand Master, respect slowly turned into fear and envy. The Templars had grown too wealthy to remain merely monks or warriors. They had become creditors from whom there was no lawful escape. This financial web laid the groundwork for future debtors to seek not repayment but destruction of the institution itself. Yet for now, at the zenith of their power, the Order of the Temple stood like an immovable rock, the pillar upon which the entire economy of the Christian world rested.
By the 1180s, the situation in the Crusader states began to deteriorate rapidly. The period of relative stability came to an end as the fragmented Muslim world united under the leadership of the talented and determined commander, Saladin. At the same time, internal divisions within the Kingdom of Jerusalem weakened Christian unity. The Templars, as the key military force, found themselves at the center of political intrigue. A crucial role in the coming catastrophe was played by Gerard de Riedfort, elected Grand Master of the Order. He was a man of desperate courage, but impulsive and overconfident. Personal rivalries and a thirst for immediate action often outweighed sober calculation. The fatal turning point came at the Battle of Hattin. Saladin besieged the city of Tiberias, luring the Crusader army out of fortified positions into the waterless desert. Despite the objections of experienced barons, Riedfort insisted on immediate advance. Exhausted by thirst and the burning sun, the Christian army was surrounded near the twin hills known as the Horns of Hattin. In the battle that followed, the army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem was almost completely destroyed. Many Templar knights fell in combat, and those captured were executed by order of Saladin, who saw them as his most implacable enemies. The loss of the Holy Sepulchre dealt a devastating blow to the reputation and spirit of the order. Though the Templars retained some fortresses along the northern coast, their primary mission, the defense of the sacred sites, was now in jeopardy. Their efforts shifted toward attempts to reclaim what had been lost, leading to the long and exhausting campaigns of the Third Crusade. Amid mounting failures, internal divisions within the Christian camp intensified. Relations between the Templars and the Hospitallers grew openly hostile. Rivalry over lands, royal influence, and negotiations with Muslim leaders led even to armed clashes between brothers in faith. These conflicts paralyzed Crusader resolve and allowed the Mamluks, who had risen to power in Egypt, to seize one fortress after another. In the mid-12th century, the Muslim offensive became unstoppable. Sultan Baybars, renowned for both brutality and military genius, systematically destroyed Crusader strongholds. Safed fell, Jaffa was taken, Antioch was destroyed. The
The Templars fought with the desperation of the doomed, often dying to the last man in defense of their citadels. By then, Christian presence in the east had been reduced to a narrow strip of coastline centered on the city of Acca. Acca became the final bastion and the new capital of the order. In 1291, a massive Mamluk army under Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil laid siege to the city. It was one of the largest sieges of the Middle Ages. Muslim forces possessed overwhelming numerical superiority and powerful siege engines that battered the walls day and night. The defense was led by Grand Master Guillaume de Beaujeu, who personally joined counterattacks and oversaw repairs of shattered defenses. Templars and Hospitallers, setting aside their rivalry, fought shoulder to shoulder, but the odds were insurmountable. When breaches opened in the walls, brutal street fighting began. Guillaume de Beaujeu was mortally wounded while attempting to repel the enemy. With his death, the defense of the city collapsed. The last refuge became the fortified Templar headquarters, the massive seaside stronghold. Several hundred knights and civilians continued resisting for days after the rest of the city had fallen. When Mamluk forces undermined the tower's foundations, its walls collapsed, burying both defenders and hundreds of attackers beneath the rubble. It was a symbolic end to the Templars' presence in Palestine. With the fall of Acca in 1291, the history of the Crusader states on the mainland effectively ended. Surviving Templars evacuated to Cyprus, which became their temporary refuge. Yet the loss of the Holy Land raised a painful question. What was now the purpose of the order? The Temple of Solomon, which had given the order its name, was once again beyond reach. Pilgrims could no longer travel to Jerusalem. In Europe, voices of criticism grew louder. Many questioned how an organization possessing such wealth and power had failed to defend the Holy Sepulchre. The Templars faced a profound crisis of identity. They still possessed immense wealth, a vast fleet, and thousands of armed brothers, but no longer a battlefield on which to prove their necessity. This vacuum of purpose, combined with growing resentment in European capitals, prepared the ground for the tragic events that would soon unfold. After the fall of Acre and the final withdrawal of Christians from the Holy Land, the Order of the Temple found itself in a paradoxical position. Possessing immense wealth, its own fleet, and a formidable army, it had lost its primary geopolitical purpose. The knights no longer protected pilgrims nor fought for the Holy Sepulchre. They had become a powerful corporation operating within European kingdoms, answering only to a distant pope. At the beginning of the 14th century, this position began to provoke open irritation among secular monarchs striving for absolute authority. The order's greatest enemy emerged in the person of King Philip IV of France, remembered by history as Philip the Fair. Cold, calculating, and fiercely ambitious, his reign was marked by constant wars and efforts to centralize power, all of which demanded enormous sums of money. The French treasury was empty. The king himself was deeply indebted to the Templars. The Paris Temple effectively managed the kingdom's finances, and Philip understood that he was hostage to his own creditors. His motives were not only financial, but political. Philip sought to create a unified state where the monarch's will stood above all else. The existence within his realm of an independent military order, exempt from taxation and enjoying extraterritorial privileges, seemed an intolerable challenge. Shortly before, Philip had entered into a bitter conflict with the papacy, resulting in the humiliation and death of Pope Boniface VIII. Destroying the Templars, loyal servants of the Pope, would demonstrate his supremacy. Preparations for the strike were conducted in the strictest secrecy. Philip understood that open war against the order might provoke a rebellion or intervention from other monarchs. He required accusations that would strip the Templars of moral legitimacy. Philip's royal advisers began collecting and fabricating testimony. Expelled members were persuaded to describe secret and blasphemous initiation rituals. In 1305, under French pressure, Clement V ascended the papal throne. He, weak and dependent, moved the papal residence to Avignon, effectively placing himself under French influence. Though Clement hesitated, Philip chose not to wait for a church trial. In September 1307, sealed letters were distributed across France to be opened simultaneously. The instructions were explicit: arrest all Templars without exception, seize their property, occupy their castles. At dawn, on Friday, October the 13th, 1307, the operation began. Across the kingdom, from Paris to the smallest provincial commandery, royal troops stormed Templar houses. The element of surprise was total. The knights, accustomed to legal protection under papal authority, offered little resistance. Thousands were arrested in a single morning, including Grand Master Jacques de Molay and the order's highest leadership. Philip declared that he acted in defense of the faith. The public was told that beneath white mantles hid heretics who spat on the cross and worshipped idols. Immediately, confiscation of archives and treasures began. Royal commissioners catalogued every coin, every document, every estate. Yet according to many accounts, the king never fully obtained the legendary Templar treasure. Some whispered that ships had departed hours before the arrests, carrying gold and secret archives into the unknown. Philip's actions triggered a chain reaction across Europe. Letters were sent to other monarchs urging them to follow his example. At first, the kings of England, Aragon, and Portugal hesitated. They had known the Templars as loyal warriors, but pressure from France and subsequent papal decrees forced them to begin investigations. The events of October 1307 marked the end of an era. In a single day, mighty bankers and warriors became prisoners, stripped of rights and protection. Philip triumphed. He freed himself from crushing debts and seized control of the order's infrastructure. Yet he understood arrest was only the beginning. To destroy the order completely, he needed confessions, public admissions of the most shameful sins. Preparations began for one of the most infamous trials in medieval history, a process that would forever reshape the meaning of justice and ecclesiastical law.
After the mass arrests, one of the darkest and most prolonged trials in human history began. Philip IV understood that imprisonment alone was not enough. To justify the seizure of Templar property before all of Europe, he required their complete moral destruction. Royal lawyers and inquisitors prepared a list of accusations designed to shock the devout population of medieval France. The charges exceeded 100 counts. The gravest were accusations of heresy. The Templars were accused of renouncing Jesus Christ, desecrating the Holy Cross during initiation rituals, and spitting upon the crucifix as a sign of loyalty to a secret rule. They were further accused of worshipping a mysterious idol known as Baphomet. Descriptions varied. Some spoke of a bearded human head, others of a horned creature. Modern historians suggest the figure was either fabricated or a distorted pronunciation of the name Muhammad, implying alleged sympathy toward Eastern culture. To obtain confessions, torture was used systematically. Under French law at the time, the most brutal methods were permitted in cases of heresy. Knights accustomed to honorable battle were broken in the dungeons of the temple. Under unbearable pain, many confessed, including Grand Master Jacques de Molay himself. Elderly and politically inexperienced, de Molay initially admitted to certain charges, hoping for mercy from the Pope and the King. Pope Clement V found himself in an impossible position. Bound to defend the order, yet dependent on Philip, he attempted to regain control of the proceedings. For a brief period in 1308, torture was suspended. Many knights immediately retracted their confessions, declaring they had spoken under coercion. Philip responded with fury. In May 1310, 54 Templars who had recanted were declared relapsed heretics. By law, this meant death without appeal. They were burned alive outside the gates of Paris. The mass execution shattered the will of the remaining prisoners. It became clear the king would stop at nothing. In 1312, at the Council of Vienne, Pope Clement issued a bull dissolving the order, not as a formal condemnation, but as an administrative act for the peace of the Church. Officially, most Templar lands were transferred to the Hospitallers. In reality, much of the wealth flowed into Philip's treasury under the pretext of legal expenses. The fate of the order's leaders remained undecided until March 1314. Jacques de Molay and 3 senior officials had spent nearly 7 years in prison. On the day of final judgment, they were brought before Notre Dame in Paris to publicly confirm their guilt and accept life imprisonment. But something unexpected happened. Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charnay proclaimed their innocence. They declared that the order had always been pure and that their previous confessions had been lies extracted under torture. It was an open defiance of the king. That very evening, Philip ordered both men burned at the stake on a small island in the Seine at the hearth of Paris. As the flames rose, witnesses claimed they heard the voice of Jacques de Molay calling out to the Pope and the King. He summoned them to meet him before God's judgment within a year. The legend of the Templar curse was born. Astonishingly, events seemed to follow his words. Pope Clement died within a month after a painful illness. 7 months later, Philip the Fair, still in the prime of his life, died suddenly after a hunting accident. His 3 sons, who successively inherited the throne, died young without male heirs, ending the Capuchin line and paving the way for the 100 Years' War. The execution of the Grand Master marked the bloody end of the order's official history. Yet his death transformed the Templars from condemned heretics into martyrs in the eyes of many. The curse, Baphomet, secret rituals, these images became inseparable from the name of the Templars. They passed from history into legend, where truth and myth intertwined forever. With the death of Jacques de Molay, the official chronicle of the Order of the Temple came to an end. Yet its story did not. The destruction of the central command in France did not mean the instant disappearance of thousands of brothers scattered across Europe. The fate of surviving Templars, their fleet, and their accumulated knowledge became the soil from which modern Western mythology would grow. The purge carried out by Philippe the Fair merely transferred the order from the realm of politics into the realm of legend. The first pressing question after 1314 concerned the vast Templar wealth. According to papal decree, most lands and castles were to pass to the order of the Hospitallers. This greatly strengthened them, eventually making them the principal defenders of the Mediterranean. Yet the transfer dragged on for decades. Secular monarchs were reluctant to surrender confiscated riches, retaining significant portions as compensation. In different lands, the fate of ordinary knights varied.
Where French influence was weak, persecution proved far less severe. In Portugal, King Denis I refused to pursue the Templars. Instead, he renamed the order, transforming it into the Order of Christ. Portuguese Templars retained their castles, their rule, and even their symbols. It was this successor order that later sponsored the Age of Discovery. The caravels of Vasco da Gama carried on their sails the same red crosses that once rode into battle in Palestine. In Scotland, then at war with England and excommunicated from the Church, papal decrees dissolving the order had little force. A persistent legend claims that Templar knights fought alongside Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Though documentation is scarce, Scotland became a land where Templar traditions were believed to survive, later merging with early forms of Freemasonry. One of the most intriguing mysteries remains the fate of the Templar fleet. On the night before the arrests in October 1307, 18 galleys reportedly departed from the port of La Rochelle, vanishing without a trace. Some speculate they reached distant shores, perhaps even the coasts of North America, long before Columbus. Others believe the treasure and archives were secretly evacuated to Portugal or Scotland. In the 18th century, during the Age of Enlightenment, interest in the Templars revived. Masonic lodges began claiming symbolic descent from the Knights of the Temple, adopting their imagery and hierarchy. The image of the Templar transformed. From warrior monk, he became guardian of ancient wisdom, keeper of forbidden knowledge. Legends arose that beneath the Temple of Solomon, the knights had discovered the Holy Grail, or the Ark of the Covenant, relics said to explain both their power and their destruction. In modern culture, the Templars live on in literature and cinema. From Walter Scott to Dan Brown, authors continue to explore the myth. Yet stripped of mystification, their true legacy is even greater. They laid foundations of modern banking, introduced principles of international logistics, and demonstrated how an organization could transcend national borders. The story of the Templars teaches how swiftly even the mightiest empire may fall when it grows richer and more influential than those who claim authority over it. In 2 centuries, the order journeyed from 9 poor knights to masters of Europe's economy, ending on the pyres of the Inquisition. Yet their spirit, carved into the stones of Syrian and French castles, emblazoned upon the Portuguese sails, and woven into endless legends, continues to stir the imagination. They remain remembered as soldiers of Christ who sought to build an ideal world with sword and ledger. Their tragedy became a lesson for future generations. Their secrets still wait in the archives of the Vatican and beneath the ruins of ancient fortresses. The history of the order is not merely a chronicle of wars and finance. It is an epic of the rise and fall of the human spirit, suspended between earthly ambition and heavenly ideals.